In April, the UK government announced a new immigration policy.
Those who travel to the UK by illegal and dangerous routes, including by small boats across the Channel, may be relocated to Rwanda, where they will have their asylum claims considered.
The first flight was scheduled for this week, and it's faced legal challenges.
The Court of Appeal said it wouldn't intervene because it said it had no lawful reason to overturn the decision on Friday from the High Court, where a judge has said that he wouldn't put an injunction in place.
Tuesday's flight goes ahead, but this matter isn't going away. The policy faces a judicial review in July, and while that process plays out, many people are still cramming into small inflatable boats and making the journey from France to England. Already this year, more than 10,000 people have done so, more than twice the equivalent of last year. Most arrive with the help of people smugglers, most will apply for asylum, many will be accepted. But the government wants to stop people reaching the UK illegally, and the plan to fly some arrivals 4,000 miles to Rwanda is part of that.
This innovative approach, driven by our shared humanitarian impulse and made possible by Brexit freedoms, will provide safe and legal routes for asylum while disrupting the business model of the gangs.
But from the start, the policy has been met with a range of opposition.
I do not support the removal to Rwanda policy on the grounds of legality, practicality and efficacy.
Theresa May raised 3 issues. The Archbishop of Canterbury had another.
There are such serious ethical questions about sending asylum seekers overseas. The principle must stand the judgment of God, and it cannot.
The former Brexit Secretary David Davis has called it moral delinquency, and The Times reported that Prince Charles privately called the plan appalling. However, Boris Johnson has again justified the policy.
This is about making sure that we break the business model of criminal gangs who are not only risking people's lives, but undermining public confidence in legal migration.
And if the business model of the gangs is broken, then arrivals will reduce. But that's not happened yet. Since April, over 3,500 people have made the crossing. Numbers haven't dipped at all, though, as this French official emphasises, it's early days.
I think it's too early to measure the impact. Regardless of the announcement, I think smugglers will watch to see if this measure is actually implemented. That's what might dissuade them.
It might dissuade them, but the UN is unconvinced.
The last time this was tried, it ignominiously failed when the Israelis moved Eritreans and Sudanese to Rwanda. They simply left the country and started the process all over again. In other words, it's not actually a long-term deterrent.
In this case, the UK government argues it can be a deterrent. To prove that, the policy needs to remain in place, and for that to happen, it needs to be deemed to be legal. The government says it is.
This agreement is comparable with all our domestic and international legal obligations.
The UN, though, told the High Court it is unlawful. Now, in the case of the first flight, it goes ahead, but this will continue for several months. The government also accepts that whoever is on the plane isn't coming back, as Mark Easton explains.
The Rwandans will do the process. They will decide whether that person is a genuine refugee. If they are, they will be then entitled to remain in Rwanda.
If they aren't, they may seek other immigration routes to stay in Rwanda, but they may be deported. And the UK's policy is now being judged against the UN Refugee Convention. The UK is a signatory. It reads, "No one shall expel or return a refugee against his or her will in any manner whatsoever to a territory where he or she fears threats to life or freedom." And that brings us to Rwanda as a destination.
They'll have to be dragged onto planes. That happens now with people who the Border Force are trying to deport. And then when they get there, there'll be all kinds of questions about their treatment and the decency of their treatment.
Those questions connect to how Rwanda's longtime president, Paul Kagame, runs the country. Last year, a UK official noted the lack of a credible independent investigation into allegations of human rights violations, including deaths in custody and torture. But Home Secretary Priti Patel has pushed back at how Rwanda's role's been questioned. She told The Telegraph there are undercurrents of just sheer xenophobia. And this is the Rwandan government's position.
We're a safe country. We're a country that's welcoming to migrants and refugees. We've hosted more than 130,000 refugees. Some have been here for more than 25 years.
Even if the policy is safe, legal and moral, there are also questions about cost.
We can't ask the British taxpayer to write a blank cheque to cover the costs of anyone who might want to come and live here.
The UK is currently spending £4.7 million a day on hostels for asylum seekers. Boris Johnson wants to reduce that by reducing arrivals. And while the Rwanda plan is supposed to do that, there are costs here too. There's an initial £120 million as part of an economic transformation and integration fund for Rwanda. There's also flying people there. The Times reports that it's estimated it'll cost between £20,000 and £30,000 to remove each asylum seeker to Rwanda. The Guardian reports the Home Office says the cost per person will be comparable to current processing costs in the UK. And in April, one senior civil servant wrote to Priti Patel telling her, "I do not believe sufficient evidence can be obtained to demonstrate that the policy will have a deterrent effect significant enough to make the policy value for money." And these doubts led to the government doing this.
Officials in the Home Office weren't able to precisely quantify the potential benefits of this plan, and so they weren't able to approve it. And so the British Home Secretary Priti Patel had to use a technique called a ministerial direction to actually get the policy signed off.
The Home Office couldn't precisely quantify the benefits, and this was the opposition Labour Party.
This scheme is completely unworkable, deeply unethical and extortionately expensive.
Asked how Labour would stop the people traffickers, Sir Keir Starmer replied, "Have a proper plan with the French authorities and a proper plan for upstream operations to intercept these groups before they even arrive on the north coast of France." And while Labour makes its case, the government highlights 7 safe and legal routes that already exist to access the UK and claim asylum. It points to specific policies for Afghans, Ukrainians and people from Hong Kong. But the charity The Refugee Council argues that, in fact, for the vast majority of refugees, there's no safe way for them to seek asylum in the UK. And as we see the government's asylum policy being fought over, some believe perhaps this was the goal. Tory MP Jessie Norman says the Rwanda policy is ugly and accuses Boris Johnson of seeking to create political and cultural dividing lines. Mr Johnson denies this, but whether by design or not, this policy is causing division, with critics alleging a lack of compassion and the Prime Minister responding like this.
There is no humanity or compassion in allowing desperate and innocent people to have their dreams of a better life exploited by ruthless gangs as they're taken to their deaths in unseaworthy boats.
The question, though, is not whether gangs should be allowed to exploit people, it's whether this policy will actually stop that from happening and if it's legal. In the long term, both have yet to be settled.